We are going to be looking at 7 of the best budget tobacco fragrances. So the criteria for this video are most of these fragrances are around $20. I think the most expensive one is $30. And in addition to that, we are not including clone fragrances in this video. And so when I'm talking about tobacco fragrances, I'm talking about fragrances that have a very forward tobacco note, or it is a main component of the note breakdown. So after I go through all 7 of these fragrances, at the end I will give a recommendation or a quick buying guide on how to choose which one of these fragrances might fit your style best. So I'm going to be going through these from least favorite to most favorite, and the first fragrance on the list is Black Walnut by Banana Republic. And this is not to be confused with Black Walnut Legend by Banana Republic, which is more of an Inventa style fragrance. This was released in 2006, and it actually won the Fifi Award for Fragrance of the Year in the men's private label and direct sale category in 2007. So this is obviously a fairly decent fragrance. So the notes on this are fairly simple. They are cognac, tobacco, and cedar. So what you get out of this is a little bit of that booziness and cognac up front, although it doesn't really stay long, and then after that it's more of a cedar and tobacco with a little bit of powdery sweetness to it. It reaches the dry down fairly quickly where the cognac is basically gone, and it's a very linear scent, which is still that same powdery sweetness with cedar and tobacco. Overall it smells really nice. Look, this made my list because it does smell really good, but the problem is it's a very simple fragrance. It's extremely linear, and the performance on this is really poor. Talking about maybe 2 to 4 hours off of this. If I want to push 4 hours, I've got to really almost bathe in this stuff. In addition to that, projection is also really poor. But it does come with a great price point. You can usually find this for $20 and sometimes under $20. You can get this at almost any rack store. You can find this at Joma Shop, Fragrance Net. They're usually around that $20 or $19 price point. Alright, next up is Cigar by Remy Latour. So this fragrance was released in 1996, and if you are looking for a $15 tobacco fragrance that is just not complete trash, then this is the one that you want to buy. I say that because once you usually dip under the $20 price point, you're really not usually going to find a fragrance that's even worth picking up. So if you have ever opened up a pouch of chewing tobacco and took a big sniff, that is what Cigar by Remy Latour smells like in the first 5 seconds of spraying this on. It's spicy, it's fruity, it's rich, it's deep tobacco. It smells so good. After you get that initial pouch tobacco blast, it starts to open up a good bit, and then a lot of the citrus notes start to come out. It's a really citrus heavy scent in the opening with all that tobacco underneath. It's got plum, bergamot, pineapple, lemon, and pear. This stuff smells so good in the opening. Over time, as those citrus notes wear off, it turns into a very warm and spicy tobacco fragrance. You have a little bit of musk and cedar underneath it with a touch of sweetness underneath it. This is a very underrated fragrance in the $15 to $20 category. If you guys are interested in this, I do have an affiliate link in the description if you want to check this one out. So the performance on this fragrance is also good. I get about 6, sometimes 8 hours of longevity, and then I can get decent projection on this for about an hour, hour and a half. The next fragrance on my list is more of a unisex sweet tobacco fragrance, and that is Zara Rich Warm Addictive out of the Tobacco collection. So this brand is not as widely known because you can really only find their fragrances, from what I understand, either at their brick and mortar stores or from their website. You really can't purchase this at places like FragranceNet, Fragrance Buy, and any of the other online fragrance discounters that I'm aware of. So this comes in at around the $20 or $22 price point, and the notes on this are rum, tobacco, honey, and bourbon vanilla. So when I first spray this fragrance, I get a lot of sweet and creamy vanilla, along with a touch of powdery sweetness like honey, and a good bit of soft and spicy tobacco. So through the length of the fragrance, that's still kind of what I get almost the entire time. It really doesn't change or develop. I get around 4 to 5 hours of longevity out of this, and the projection is around an hour. But I can tell you the scent trail this leaves is really nice. It's unisex. Women really like the way this smells on guys, and it's not too feminine, it's not too sweet, at least to my nose, so it definitely leans in the unisex category for me. So the next fragrance is one of my favorite to wear during the holidays. That would be around Thanksgiving and Christmas time, and that is London for Men by Burberry. So this is one of those fragrances that are very reminiscent of the holiday season. If you're thinking of Christmas spices, cinnamon, nutmeg, things like that. So if you look at some of the notes on Burberry's website, we have bergamot, lavender, cinnamon, leather, and tobacco leaves. So when I first spray this on, I get a lot of peppers and spices mixed with sweet bergamot and lavender. So this is not really a tobacco dominant note or a tobacco dominant fragrance like Cigar by Remy Latour. This is more one where the tobacco plays a very large role in the fragrance, but it is not a extreme heavy tobacco dominant fragrance. So after this one dries down a bit, the tobacco and leather come out a little bit more, but there's still a heavy dose of cinnamon, spicy notes, along with that fresh lavender. Overall, it just has that holiday style fragrance appeal to it. As far as performance goes, I get about 6 hours of longevity on this, and the projection is about, I would say the projection is fairly light to moderate. Alright, next we have our MAF Radical Brown. This has notes of citruses, pepper, cinnamon, tobacco, lavender, amber, and cedar. So when I first spray this on, I get a heavy dose of sweet cherry tobacco mixed with some cinnamon and spices. So while that cherry note really smells good mixed with the tobacco, it doesn't stay too long, and over time, as that cherry goes away, it develops more into a spicy sweet tobacco note with a little bit of incense mixed in, along with a lot of cedar. While the scent gets a 10 out of 10 for me, what keeps this from being higher on my list is definitely going to be the performance. I get around 3 to 4 hours out of this, and the projection on it is also fairly weak. If this fragrance had a lot better performance, this stuff would be insanely incredible. Alright, next up we have CK Shock for Him by Calvin Klein. This was released in 2011, and it has notes of clementine, lavender, cardamom, pepper, tobacco, and woods. So CK1 Shock to me is one of those fragrances that's kind of like a gateway into a more tobacco heavy fragrance. It's very easy to wear. It's got a lot of sweet citrus notes at the top mixed with some lavender. Also has a little bit of spices and pepper, along with a really solid tobacco note. Now, if you have smelled a lot of more expensive tobacco fragrances, or even a lot of designer tobacco fragrances that are in the $50 to $100 range, this will probably come off a little bit more synthetic and seems to use a little bit more aroma chemicals. But for a $19 or $20 fragrance, this does the job. So when I first put this on, I do get a lot of like an orange mixed with lavender, in addition to a lot of that powdery sweet cardamom along with some pepper. Underneath that sits a warm base of amber and a very solid tobacco note. It does change a little bit over time. Those citrus notes kind of go away. The fresh, sweet spiciness of the cardamom kind of drops a little bit, and once it dries down, it's more of a warm amber and tobacco fragrance with some of that pepper and spice. This is definitely a solid pickup if you're looking for that type of quality fragrance in that $20 range. Performance on it is pretty good. I get around 6 hours of longevity and decent projection for about around an hour. Alright, so last up at the number one spot is one of my personal favorites, and that is John Varvatos Vintage. I will admit I'm a huge fan of, it's one of my favorite fragrance houses, but in terms of scent quality, uniqueness, and how easy this one is to wear, I had to rate it a little bit higher than some of the other ones. And this is also the most expensive one out of the group. The smaller size, you can usually get around $30, $31, and the 4.2 or the 100 ml is usually around the mid 30s, around $35 to $38. But if you stay at that price point, around $30 or less, you should be able to find the smaller bottle. So John Varvatos Vintage is not a heavy tobacco dominant fragrance. You're not going to spray this on and immediately think that you are burying your face in a pouch of Red Man tobacco like Cigar by Remy Latour. This is more of a well-rounded fragrance that has a main component of the tobacco note in it. So this one has a large note breakdown. I'll just kind of go over what I feel are the most prominent notes: rhubarb, pepper, fennel, cinnamon, juniper, lavender, greens, tonka bean, suede, tobacco, and woods. So when I first spray this on, I get a little bit of a sour and tart fruit note, which is probably the rhubarb coming out, with just a little bit of fennel mixed in there, which is a very light licorice note. After a minute or so, it starts to become a little bit more woody, where I get a little bit of lavender, juniper, and cinnamon. So once it kind of makes the progression through those top and mid notes, what comes out underneath is tobacco and suede, a little bit of that sweet powdery tonka, and a little bit of woods mixed up. So to me, this is how a fragrance should be. I should be able to get top notes, mid notes, and base notes, all providing a separate experience and just a different range of how this scent develops over time, which is the primary reason I have this as my favorite of these budget tobacco fragrances. A lot of these other fragrances are very linear, they're very light, they don't capture a scent journey of going through these progressions of top, mid, and base notes. Overall, John Varvatos Vintage is one of my favorite fragrances altogether, not just in the budget tobacco world. I just really love the way this stuff smells. It's very affordable. The biggest downside to this, which you'll hear this with John Varvatos fragrances all the time, is a lack of performance. So for this, you're going to get probably around 4 to 6 hours, and light projection, you'll get probably arm's length around 45 minutes to an hour. Outside of that, you're going to have to get pretty close to be able to smell this. So that's kind of why I have this one as my number one. Okay, so if you are dying for a inexpensive tobacco fragrance, which one would I recommend and why? So to me, if you're looking for a sweet and unisex tobacco fragrance that's full of honey and vanilla, I would definitely recommend Zara. If you're looking for a more realistic cigar or pouch tobacco fragrance, I'd go with Cigar by Remy Latour. If you're wanting a entry-level tobacco fragrance that still has a heavy, prominent note of tobacco, but is still easy to wear, that's beginner friendly, I would go with CK1 Shock for him. If you are looking for a great spicy tobacco fragrance that's really good for the holidays, you like those potpourri type scents, those spicy fragrances kind of like Dior Sauvage Elixir or Assad, then I would go with London for Men by Burberry. If you want a simple, boozy cedar tobacco fragrance that's inexpensive, you're going to go with Black Walnut by Banana Republic. And if you want an overall tobacco fragrance where really quality fragrance as far as the transition of the notes, and you're looking for something that's easy to wear, that's affordable, and that you're going to get a lot of compliments on, I would go with John Barbados Vintage.